In 1949, as Indonesia emerged from a brutal war of independence, a single Douglas DC-3 named Salawa carried the new republic's diplomats through hostile skies. That aircraft became the foundation of Garuda Indonesia, named after the mythological eagle of Hindu legend. It was a symbol before it was a business, a flag before it was a fleet. For 7 decades since, Indonesian aviation has accepted a painful truth. The country has everything an airline should need: a population larger than Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, or Malaysia, combined with several of those. An archipelago of thousands of islands where aviation is not luxury, but infrastructure. A growing middle class, a world-famous tourism destination in Bali, a massive business capital in Jakarta. Yet in late 2025, the Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund completed a 1.4 billion equity injection into Garuda, with explicit instructions that the money could not be used for fleet expansion. The funds were directed entirely toward maintenance, working capital, and settling $225 million in unpaid fuel debts owed to Pertamina. Singapore Airlines, based in a city-state with essentially no domestic market, carried 42.4 million passengers in FY 2025-26 and generated a $1.1 billion net profit. Garuda, sitting on top of the 4th largest population on Earth, carried 21.1 million passengers and posted a $319.3 million net loss in FY 2025. Singapore has no archipelago, no Bali, no 280 million potential domestic customers. Yet, every Indonesian aviation analyst studies Singapore Airlines with envy, while every regional airline studies Garuda as a cautionary tale. So, how can a country this big produce a flag carrier this fragile? To understand why Garuda is fighting for survival while Singapore Airlines expands, we need to understand why Indonesia's greatest aviation advantage became its greatest aviation trap. Indonesia's geography looks like a gift on paper. Thousands of islands stretched: Jakarta to Bali, to Medan, to Makassar, to Surabaya, to Balikpapan, to Manado, to Papua. Aviation is not a choice in this country. It is the only practical way to move. But geography that creates demand does not automatically create profitable airlines. The Indonesian domestic market is overwhelmingly price sensitive. It rewards frequency, low fares, dense seating, and operational simplicity. It punishes legacy costs, premium cabins, and complex full-service operations. That trade-off seemed manageable for decades when Garuda enjoyed a protected monopoly as the state's chosen carrier. Then, in 2000, Indonesia deregulated its aviation market. That single policy decision broke the model. The year 2000 was when Lion Air launched commercial flights. The timing was perfect. A newly deregulated archipelago of price-sensitive travelers was exactly the market a low-cost carrier needed. Lion Air did not try to be elegant. It built itself around cheap domestic flying, ordered enormous numbers of aircraft, and focused relentlessly on scale, frequency, and price. Garuda did not lose because Indonesia stopped flying. It lost because Indonesia's growth went low cost. This is the first critical inversion of the story. In an archipelago like Indonesia, the airline that wins domestic scale becomes more important to everyday passengers than the national flag carrier. Garuda had the flag, Lion had the country. Garuda recognized this threat. It created CityLink as a low-cost subsidiary, an airline within an airline, designed to fight Lion Air on its own terms. The strategy was necessary, but it was also revealing. CityLink became important. Now, Garuda Group operates 137 aircraft, with 79 under the Garuda mainline brand and 58 under CityLink. The growth engine of the group was no longer the prestigious flag carrier, it was the budget subsidiary built to chase Lion Air. That created complexity. Two brands, different cost bases, different customer promises, different fleet philosophies, different route strategies, all managed by an airline that was simultaneously fighting for its financial life. Singapore Airlines runs a similar dual-brand model with Scoot, but the SIA mainline remains globally dominant. Garuda's mainline, by contrast, has been continuously starved of capital, attention, and clarity. You see, while Garuda was being shredded at home, Singapore Airlines was building something entirely different abroad. Singapore is a city-state with almost no domestic market. That forced Singapore Airlines to become international from day one. Changi Airport was deliberately engineered as a transfer hub, sitting geographically between Europe, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, China, Japan, and the Pacific. If you are flying London to Sydney, Singapore is obvious, Jakarta is not. The Singapore strategy was clean, premium service, operational discipline, long-haul connectivity, fleet modernization, strong brand consistency, deep alliance partnerships, high-yield business, and transfer passengers. Jakarta's Soekarno-Hatta, by contrast, is huge, but historically congested, and primarily an origin and destination airport. This is one of the biggest structural explanations of the entire story. Singapore built a hub, Garuda served a country. Both were rational responses to geography, only one created a globally powerful airline. Garuda tried to escape this trap by flying long-haul anyway. It joined SkyTeam in 2014 to gain global alliance credibility. It launched prestige routes to Amsterdam, London, Tokyo, the Middle East, and Australia. The Jakarta to London route was the symbol. It looked impressive on a route map. Garuda quietly abandoned the route entirely in 2018. Amsterdam was the historical sentimental favorite, with deep colonial ties between the Netherlands and Indonesia. It also remained chronically unprofitable. Why? Because long-haul flying from Jakarta is hard. Jakarta is far from Europe. Yields are inconsistent. The airline lacks the transfer machine that Singapore has, and foreign airlines could carry Indonesian passengers through their own hubs. Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Qatar Airways, Turkish Airlines, Cathay Pacific, ANA, JAL, Korean Air, China Airlines, EVA Air, and the Gulf carriers could all compete for Indonesian long-haul traffic. The Indonesian passenger flying to Europe had a dozen one-stop options, and Garuda was rarely the cheapest or the most convenient. A prestige route map is not the same thing as a profitable network. Surely Bali would help. Indonesia's most famous tourism destination, one of the most recognized leisure brands on Earth, should generate massive flows for the national carrier. It does not. Bali tourism creates a different kind of aviation demand. It is leisure-heavy. It is seasonal. It is intensely price-sensitive. And it is served directly by foreign airlines from Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, China, Korea, Japan, and the Middle East. A tourist flying Melbourne to Bali takes Qantas, Jetstar, or Virgin. A European tourist connects through Dubai, Doha, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Bangkok, Taipei, or Hong Kong. Bali helps Indonesia. It builds hotels, restaurants, and airport revenue. But Bali does not automatically create a Garuda megahub. Indonesia's most famous destination is not the same thing as a protected flag carrier market. Airlines live with aircraft decisions for decades. The wrong aircraft can destroy route economics. The wrong lease terms can destroy the balance sheet. The wrong procurement process can destroy the airline. Garuda's fleet became a scandal. Former Garuda CEO Emir Sattar, who led the airline from 2005 to 2014, was deeply implicated in corruption surrounding the procurement of CRJ-1000 regional jets and ATR 72-600 turboprops. Investigators found that Qatar had leaked confidential procurement plans to commercial advisors and unilaterally altered the required seating capacity from 70 seats to 90 seats without board approval. The CRJ-1000 was a strange fit for Indonesia. The aircraft were incompatible with Garuda's full-service positioning and saddled the airline with operational losses. Garuda was eventually forced to terminate the leases for all Bombardier CRJ-1000s amid the bribery probe. In October 2024, a Jakarta High Court doubled Qatar's prison sentence for procurement graft from 5 to 10 years. This came on top of a previous 6-year sentence from 2020 for accepting kickbacks from Airbus and Rolls-Royce. Singapore Airlines' fleet became a strategic weapon. Garuda's fleet became a source of legal humiliation, financial loss, and operational chaos. By 2021, claims against Garuda had ballooned to as much as $13.8 billion. The airline was effectively insolvent. In June 2022, a Jakarta commercial court ratified a massive debt restructuring plan that cut Garuda's recognized debt from approximately $10.1 billion to roughly $5.1 billion, renegotiated aircraft orders and leases, and converted obligations into bonds and equity. This is one of the central reasons Garuda could not grow like Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines invests from a position of strength. It announces fleet orders, it expands routes, it accumulates cash reserves. Garuda spends its energy renegotiating leases, fighting creditors, and rebuilding trust with suppliers. You cannot build a global mega carrier while fighting creditors and grounding aircraft, because you cannot afford spare parts. State ownership is not the problem. The question is how the state behaves as the owner. Does it allow commercial discipline? Does it support long-term investment? Or does it interfere with routes, procurement, staffing, and leadership? Garuda's story shows what happens when state ownership combines with weak governance. The Indonesian government repeatedly assigned Garuda conflicting mandates. Be a premium global airline. Be a domestic connectivity provider for thin regional routes. Be a national symbol. Be a tourism ambassador. Be a state-owned enterprise serving political objectives. Be a competitor to low-cost carriers. Be a regional airline through smaller aircraft. Be a long-haul carrier. Singapore Airlines has a cleaner job. Connect Singapore to the world and bring the world through Singapore. That is one mission. Garuda had several. When you have several missions, you have no mission. Malaysia Airlines offers the most useful comparison. It faced almost identical pressures: domestic low-cost competition from AirAsia, geographic proximity to Singapore Airlines, Gulf carrier pressure, years of restructuring. Yet, Malaysia Aviation Group reported a positive 137 million Malaysian ringgit net profit in FY 2025. The group carried 18.6 million passengers with an 81% load factor. That profit was small and fragile, but it was a profit. Garuda, sitting on a vastly larger domestic market, lost hundreds of millions in the same period. This is the comparison that reframes everything. Malaysia Airlines struggled despite having a better hub geography in Kuala Lumpur. Garuda struggled despite having a vastly larger domestic market. The lesson is that neither geography alone nor scale alone is enough. You need strategic clarity, financial discipline, and governance integrity. Garuda lacked all three. Behind the billion-dollar restructurings sit real people. Garuda slashed roughly 30% of its workforce during the pandemic. Pay was cut across the board. Labor unions, including the Garuda Indonesia Labor Union, the Garuda Pilot Association, and the Garuda Indonesia Cabin Crew Union, publicly pleaded with the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises to intervene. Union leaders criticized management for treating the crisis purely as a financial restructuring problem, while ignoring the fundamental commercial mistakes in fleet and route strategy. For Indonesian passengers, the airline's struggles meant another kind of pain. The Indonesia Competition Commission fined Garuda 1 billion Indonesian rupiah for restricting profitable Jeddah and Medina pilgrimage ticket sales to a syndicate of just 6 major travel agencies, choking out hundreds of other businesses and artificially inflating airlines. Travel agents publicly accused the airline of discriminatory pricing. Most regional carriers cannot save Garuda. Singapore Airlines cannot replicate Garuda's domestic market. Lion Air cannot replicate Garuda's premium product. Malaysia Airlines cannot solve Garuda's governance. So, the Indonesian state is attempting something different. Danantara is targeting the first half of 2026 to complete a massive consolidation, merging Garuda Indonesia, CityLink, and Pelita Air, currently owned by Pertamina, into a single aviation holding company. Garuda will act as the parent. CityLink and Pelita Air will operate as subsidiaries, eliminating overlapping overhead and optimizing aircraft utilization across duplicated routes. In late 2025, CEO Wamudan Sani Panjaitan was replaced by Glenny Kairupan, a former military officer with close ties to the Indonesian presidency. This was the second new CEO in less than a year. Garuda is also reportedly evaluating the Chinese-made Comac C919 as a future fleet option, given the multi-year backlogs at Boeing and Airbus. But it depends entirely on Western technology, including CFM LEAP 1C engines and avionics, making it vulnerable to US export restrictions and entity list inclusion. The fleet that destroyed Garuda once may be about to rebuild with even greater geopolitical risk. Here is the line that reframes the entire story. Garuda was the airline Indonesia wanted to show the world. Lion was the airline Indonesia actually used. Garuda matched the state's image of what a national airline should be: premium, international, prestigious, full service, Sky Team member, Boeing 777 operator, Amsterdam route, Sydney route, London route. Lion matched the market: low fares, domestic scale, mass market travel, point-to-point island connectivity, aggressive aircraft orders. The Indonesian market rewarded the second model more than the first, and in punishing Garuda's structural mismatch with the market, Indonesia did not just punish one airline. It demonstrated a broader principle that every emerging economy with a large domestic market eventually confronts. A huge domestic market does not automatically produce a global aviation icon. Domestic scale produces domestic airlines. Global influence requires hub geography, premium yields, governance discipline, and strategic clarity. Indonesia had the population. It did not have the hub. It did not have the discipline. It did not have the focus. The question isn't whether Garuda can become Singapore Airlines. It's whether Indonesia is really paying attention to what its own market has been telling it for the past 25 years.